Why is your gear breaking so fast? Where is all this damage coming from? How much are we paying to repair all this, exactly? Hi, I'm Khyone, and this is Sharlayan Dropouts, where I tell you detailed things about Final Fantasy XIV that nobody cares about. Disclaimer! I am not a modder, nor a data miner, so everything you're about to see is extrapolated from extensive in-game testing and may or may not be subject to inaccuracies. For those of you who don't like long explanations, you can just skip to the conclusion section to get the short summary. As for the rest of us, let's not waste time and deep dive into the mechanics. What exactly is gear durability? A lot of people probably already know that it represents how much damage your gear has taken, and that once broken, your gear no longer works. But the details of this mechanic are sort of skimmed over, even in official sources, and the entire system itself has even changed over the years, so let's shed some light on this subject. First off, gear durability is a representation of how damaged the armor and weapons you are wearing is. Despite it often being called durability, even within the official UI guide, it should not be confused with crafting and gathering durability, which is used in various minigames related to the Disciples of Hand and Land. Gear durability, or condition, as it is labeled on your equipment, is listed as a percentage, usually between 0 to 100, which can actually be a fairly misleading metric. The percentage shown is an abstraction of the true value of your armor, and you can lose half, a quarter, or even a tenth of a percent without it visually appearing on your gear. It's likely just a rounding of what is probably a flat number behind the scenes, and the percentage won't change until it falls below the listed amount, always rounding down. Gear functions normally at all percentages except 0, at which point it acts as if it's not even there. All stat bonuses, materia bonuses, and auxiliary effects, such as the haste effect provided by Bosnian armor, cease to work while your gear is broken. You might as well just unequip the damn things, because it'll have the exact same effect. Okay, we all knew that much, but what exactly reduces the condition of our gear? As it turns out, this is a fairly complicated answer, and changes depending on what you're wearing and what you're doing. To start, let's take any Disciple of War and equip them with any set of gear. Regardless of what level the gear is and what level of content you're doing, the amount of durability lost during gameplay is exactly the same. So even if you're wearing level 1 armor and fighting against a level 90 Zeromus, you'll still receive the same amount of durability loss as someone wearing level 90 armor against a level 20 Ifrit. The exact rate at which your gear depletes is dependent on the content in question. Once you complete a trial, dungeon, or instance content of any kind, a specific amount of condition is subtracted from your gear. Now wait a minute, I might hear you ask. That doesn't sound right. Isn't gear reduced by fighting enemies, taking damage, all that sort of thing? And the answer is no, not at all. You could take 9 billion damage, deal 9 billion damage, and kill either a 0 or 1,000 enemies, but the only thing that reduces gear durability is the completion of whatever content you're engaging in, whether that be by finishing a dungeon or achieving victory in a fate. Of course, this isn't how it always used to be. Prior to Shadowbringers patch 5.3, defeating enemies at any point in the overworld or within instance content gave rewards to the player, in both XP and gil. It was when these rewards were given that the gear durability was calculated and subtracted. However, when the game changed its underlying systems to reduce stress on the servers, both durability and spirit bond were changed to only calculate when triggered by certain flags, most of which are attached to the many forms of content within the game. Ever since then, you will only lose durability when tripping these flags, and no amount of mob grinding will make you lose even a single % of condition. Even if you were to do the entirety of a dungeon, clearing every single enemy on the way, if you quit before the last boss, you wouldn't suffer any damage to your gear. With that considered, I have taken a look at every single form of content in the game, and tested to see whether or not you lose gear durability upon its completion, and exactly how much is taken away. Since gear condition isn't representative of the true numbers behind the scenes, I had to do a lot of trials to get accurate values, sometimes as many as 50 straight runs. But the data I gathered led to some interesting revelations. First, similar content is grouped and does the same amount of gear wear, meaning that all trials will do the same amount of damage to you, and I do not have to list out every damn raid dungeon in the game, thank God. Second, not all gear is built the same. Your left side gear depletes at a slower rate than your right side gear, and your chest piece has the greatest durability of all, giving us 3 different categories of gear to keep track of. Third, gear wear has slight variance. While the numbers average out to some pretty reasonable numbers, there are occasional outliers where one piece of gear shows slightly more or slightly less wear than the others. The amount of variance isn't known to me, but it's generally so slight that it almost doesn't make too much of a difference, maybe something like a 5% shift in values. So while the numbers I show you should be relatively accurate, expect some deviations, especially when gear durability is being lost at rapid rates or over longer periods. So, let's see what damages your gear from lowest to highest. Starting from the bottom, we have Trials, Bosgen Critical Engagements, Eureka's Notorious Monsters, and Raids, which all deal the same amount of durability loss as a group. If you're fighting one thing, and one thing only, it is going to do this much damage to your gear. Notice that I have excluded content such as Savage Raids and other harder variants of the same fights. In general, whenever a harder version of the same content is available, it will do the exact same amount of damage to your equipment. So a raid is a raid, and a dungeon is a dungeon, Savage or not. Moving on from there, we have, in ascending order, Bosgen Skirmishes, Fates, Map Dungeons, Regular Dungeons, Alliance Raids, and Variant Dungeons. Variant dungeons in particular are a nasty outlier, as despite the fact that they are basically the same length as a regular dungeon, do an incredible amount of condition damage, and will break most of your gear in as few as 13 attempts. Now that's a lot of damage. Excluded from this chart are all forms of content that don't cause durability loss. These being solo instances, guild hests, hunts, fighting overworld mobs, deep dungeons, all forms of PvP content, and leaf quests. Performing any of these won't hurt your precious relic weapons in the slightest, so have at 'em. More astute observers will have noticed that I neglected to mention a few more kinds of content, these being ultimates, masked carnival, and large-scale instances such as Delubrum Reginae and the Balthesian Arsenal. All of these do cause gear wear, but I am either unable to clear them, lack the appropriate class levels, or the process of clearing them repeatedly would simply take far too much time for me to reasonably do. If anybody in the comments would like to do 20 trials of these back to back without dying, and recording the durability lost after each successful clear, I can make an addendum with the missing information at a later date. Speaking of dying is a special form of gear wear that reduces the durability of everything you are wearing by a flat 2%. Yes, you heard that right. Gear wear is literally controlled by death and taxes. This 2% reduction does not care about left side or right side gear differences and affects all pieces of gear equally. Dying in any way at any point in time will induce this penalty, with a few notable exceptions. If you are under level 10, you won't incur gear penalties from dying, likely to prevent new players from struggling with the game. Similarly, dying in any of the Bosgen Southern Front content causes no gear penalties whatsoever. Considering that dying here is pretty easy as a new player and you lose metal on every death, this seems like a small mercy from the developers who, expecting you to perish repeatedly in this zone, didn't want to punish you any more than they already have. No such mercy was given to Eurekan players. Sorry guys, the dragon needs to eat too. Okay, so that explains Disciple of War content, but what about the Disciples of Hand and Land? No problem. After all, there's not many optional forms of content for these classes. All we have to do is craft a few items, test between the different levels and types of crafting or gathering, and... Sorry? The amount of gear durability reduced is dependent on level? And it goes up on a scale? Ugh, hold please.
2,000 years later.
Alright, after some extensive testing, I found out how it works, and why it works the way it does is completely beyond me. I don't make these rules, I just test them, so bear with me. First, all forms of crafting and gathering are equal. It doesn't matter if it's a collectible, or an unspoiled note, or a master recipe, or from a folklore book, or even how many stars it has. All crafting and gathering will reduce your gear condition by the same amount. But the amount reduced varies depending on level, specifically the last 15 levels. You see, from levels 1 to 74, the amount of durability you'll lose remains the same no matter what gear you're wearing or what you're crafting or gathering. But the moment you get to level 75, gear wear begins to increase at a steady rate, causing more and more damage the closer you get to 90. Why level 75? I have no idea. I thought perhaps it could be because of a change during the Stormblood expansion, but that doesn't explain why it starts at level 75 and not level 70. This one is a complete mystery to me and can probably only be answered by the developers themselves. Yoshi-p, please send me a message. In any case, here's the data for both crafting and gathering. As a general statement, every 10 gathering attempts seems to be approximately equivalent to one successful crafted item. Again, it doesn't matter the quality or the quantity of items made, just how many times you perform the action. As a special note, gathering leaf quests still incur gear penalties, since you have to physically gather the items, while crafting leaf quests are simply turn-ins and you don't actually have to craft anything yourself to receive their rewards. Similarly, gathering in the diadem doesn't cause any changes to gear wear, and using the ether cannon does not reduce the durability of your gear. And in case you were wondering, expert crafting recipes aren't anything special either. Oh, and gathering on your island sanctuary doesn't do anything to your gear, for those of you still doing that. And that's it. That's everything that can do damage to your gear. So what about repairing your gear? Well, as most people know, you can take your gear to menders located all across Eorzea to repair your gear for a fee. This acts as one of the game's gold sinks and helps remove gil from the economy. But how much are we spending exactly? As it turns out, the level of your gear changes the price that you pay to repair it. Sort of. You see, the cost is actually calculated not from the gear's level requirement, but the repair level requirement, which is this little line of text here that tells you what level of which crafter you need to repair it. In the end, this functionally amounts to being basically the same thing, but some odd cases occur where gear with different level requirements may cost the same amount of gil to repair. Here is a small table listing short guidelines on how much you should expect to pay per piece of gear at the appropriate levels. Despite gear condition depleting at different rates, it's all repaired for the same cost, so a broken chest piece and a ring will run you the same amount of gil. Of course, you Omnicrafters out there know that the best price to pay to repair your gear is 0. If you are capable of meeting the repair level requirements, you can use various forms of dark matter to repair your gear. Not only does this fix your gear for free, but it also allows you to over-repair your gear, increasing its condition beyond 100%. Each piece of dark matter you use to repair your gear adds exactly 100% condition to the piece you are repairing, which can go over the 100% limit normally imposed by menders. This allows for a maximum of 199% condition on your gear. Pretty sweet! Next time you go into raid, ask your resident Omnicrafter to repair your gear so that you can die a few more times without having to worry about going back to phase 1. On the topic of making your gear last longer, there are several effects in the game that can actually reduce gear wear. These effects are fairly few and far between, but can significantly increase the amount of time between repairs when used correctly. The first and most prominent of these sources is in free company actions, which can reduce the amount of gear durability you lose anywhere between 10 to 30%. Those of you who don't want to beg your FC leaders for buffs can send out your Grand Company's Adventurer Squadron to collect gear maintenance manuals, which have identical, non-stacking effects. Additionally, you can acquire durability drops using Grand Company seals, allowing you to get a plus 30 bonus to reduce durability loss? How much is 30 exactly? As it turns out, plus 30 reduced durability loss is actually just 30%. I'm not sure why, but these medicine buffs are just percentage bonuses masquerading as flat numbers. Spirit Bond potions likely function the exact same way, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole I'd rather not get into right now. In any case, this buff stacks additively with our 30% buff from earlier, giving us a sweet 60% reduction to all gear wear we take. But that's not all! Lesser known are the food buffs, which reduce durability loss. Often found in housing items, these can offer a small bonus to durability loss reduction. Again, the flat number shown is just a percentage in disguise. The best of these buffs is the coveted bacon broth, which at high quality gives a wondrous 5% reduced durability loss for a grand total of 65% maximum protection for our equipment. As a side note, all of these buffs do help to reduce the gear penalty from dying, with the sole exception of the medicine buff from the durability drop. Dying causes medicine buffs to disappear, and unfortunately it seems to remove the buff right before it calculates durability loss, making the maximum amount you can reduce from death 35%. So to recap everything, or to give the short version for those of you who skipped to the end, gear durability is lost only at the moment of completion of certain types of content, reducing condition by a hidden value with slight variance. Killing enemies doesn't cause gear wear. Different types of gear take different amounts of damage, and the damage scales either based on the content you're doing for Disciples of War, or by a level if you're a Disciple of Hand or Land. Dying damages your equipment by 2% across the board, unless you're below level 10 or in a Bosgen instance. You can extend the lifetime of your gear either by over-repairing or stacking durability loss reduction effects, which you can get from free company buffs, food, and potions. Final Fantasy XIV sure has a lot of interesting nuance to its mechanics, even if all of them aren't exactly practical. I hope this information was as useless to you as it was to me. This is the end of the video, but I'd like to make a quick special thanks to the following people for helping me at various stages during my testing and research. Shoutouts to my raid mates for assisting me, particularly my dear friend Aurelian, who did far too many runs of Hell's Lid with me so that I can confirm some of my findings. Now, if you'll all excuse me, I'm going back to playing Rabbit and Steel.
Look, I've been moving left every single time. Don't fucking